In the shadowed marble corridors of Athens, where philosophers once walked barefoot and generals spilled blood in the name of glory, there thrived another current untamed, carnal, and strangely revered. Beneath the golden myths and noble statues, the ancient Greeks were not merely thinkers or warriors. They were lovers obsessed, experimental, and often unapologetically bizarre. This is not the Greece you see on postcards, not the solemn Parthenon nor the chiseled jawlines of Troy. This is Greece in its full, fleshy absurdity, where a man might seduce a statue, where wine flowed like blood in orgies of intellect and desire, and where even the gods were perverts. With THUNDERBOLTS. So let the temples tremble, let the ghosts of Sparta moan from their graves. This is the story of 10 truths they never told you in school, 10 perverse and bewildering sexual customs from the civilization that gave us democracy, and also public masturbation. 10. The desperate alchemy of birth control before modern medicine. Birth control in ancient Greece resembled something between a tragic magic show and a test of female endurance. To avoid unwanted pregnancy, women were advised to drink cold water and violently sneeze after intercourse. Yes, sneeze, as though a gust from the nostrils might expel fate itself. The physician Serenus, with all the conviction of a mad poet, prescribed the following method. Let the woman hold her breath, draw her body backward, and provoke sneezes immediately after lying with a man. It was less medical advice than a gymnastic ritual. If that failed, some women reportedly inserted lint soaked in wine or, horrifyingly, wooden blocks to plug the cervix. There were dietary options too: dates, lentils, and vast quantities of pomegranates believed to cool the womb. And perhaps they did. Modern science suggests these foods may, in fact, reduce fertility. But one cannot ignore the desperation etched into these methods. These weren't the quaint quirks of a distant people, they were the crude survival tactics of women, whose lives could be unraveled by a single conception. Hidden beneath this practice is a timeless truth that throughout history, control over reproduction has meant control over destiny, and women, for millennia, fought like ghosts against a world that refused to hear them. 9. The philosopher who masturbated in public. In the heart of Athens, amid the proud colonnades of the Agora, stood a man in rags, stinking of wine and rebellion. His name was Diogenes, and when he wasn't sleeping in a barrel or mocking Plato, he was masturbating openly, defiantly, in the street. When scolded for this, he simply shrugged and said, "If only rubbing my belly could cure hunger as easily as this cures lust." Diogenes wasn't insane. He was a revolutionary, weaponizing shame as a mirror to Greek hypocrisy. In a society obsessed with moderation and order, he wielded his own flesh as protest, stripping away pretense. The act was grotesque, but the message was divine. Your rules are lies. Your dignity is performance. In Greek comedy, too, masturbation was a recurring punchline. Aristophanes' Lysistrata mocked Spartan men so sex-starved they pleasured themselves, until their erections practically started peace negotiations. It seems absurd now. But then again, don't our own times sanitize what they can't control? What Diogenes did with his body, we do with our Instagram filters. He chose shame as his rebellion and dared the world to blink. 8. The kiss that could ruin a man. Kissing. Tender, harmless, romantic. But in ancient Greece, to kiss your wife on the lips in public could brand you a weak man, emasculated, even enslaved by female influence. To the Greeks, kissing was for equals. Male friends, warriors, and statesmen would greet each other with kisses on the lips, cheek, or hand as symbols of trust and brotherhood. But a wife, a woman, that implied parity where none was permitted. When Pericles, the famed Athenian general, kissed his wife in view of the public, it wasn't seen as sweet. It was scandal. It suggested she had sway over him, that her lips had the power to shape strategy or soften decisions. It echoed the ancient fear. The power of women was a whisper that could topple empires, and beneath this lay a brutal societal fault line. A woman in Greece could bear children, keep a home, even inspire poetry, but she was not to be an equal. Love was allowed, affection sometimes, but respect, that was for men alone. We kiss differently now, or do we? 7. brothels built by the state, funded by lust. Imagine a city where the government owns the brothels, where tax revenue from sex work is used to build temples. This was Athens under Solon. Solon, lawgiver and reformer, legalized prostitution, built public brothels, and regulated prices so the service would be affordable to all. These establishments welcomed both male and female sex workers, serving clients of all persuasions. There was no shame in visiting a brothel, just hierarchy. Some prostitutes wore sandals that imprinted "Follow me" in the dirt. Others, the heterae, were as brilliant as they were seductive. They read poetry, debated politics, and seduced with words before flesh. Their clients were not just seeking pleasure, but intellectual intimacy. And the tax, Solon dedicated it to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, sex, and war. It is said the temple of Aphrodite Pandemos in Athens was built with revenue from these brothels. Beneath the glittering white columns of Greece, desire was not a private shame, it was a civic engine. Lust was monetized, celebrated, even divine. And yet, for all their openness, these brothels revealed something darker. Power still belonged to men. Pleasure was structured, commercialized, and gendered. Liberation, perhaps, but not equality. 6. Pedesty, love or exploitation. To confront ancient Greece is to confront a truth modern minds recoil from. In many city-states, especially Athens and Sparta, older men were encouraged to take young boys as lovers. The practice was called pederasty, and it cloaked itself in the language of mentorship. A grown man, the erastes, would educate a boy, the eromenos, guiding him intellectually, spiritually, and sexually. The relationship was not secret, it was ritualized, public, even celebrated in art and literature. In Sparta, it was bound. 2 military lifeboys taken at age 7, raised for war, and molded by men who often became their first sexual partners. To the Greeks, this was not exploitation, it was training, brotherhood, a warrior's rite of passage. But make no mistake, this was a society that normalized abuse under the guise of honor. Love was a lie spoken by the powerful to justify desire. Some resisted. Plato himself, in Laws, criticized the practice, yet it endured. Today, pederasty is rightly condemned, but the Greeks' treatment of it should not be dismissed as ancient ignorance. It must be seen for what it was, a deeply embedded structure of control, dressed in philosophy and draped in shameful beauty. 5. The sacred doodle. Phalluses everywhere. You may think crude genital graffiti is a product of modern adolescence. Think again. In ancient Greece, they carved them into marble, painted them on vases, stitched them into tapestries. Massive, exaggerated penises, everywhere, on drinking cups, in sacred temples, on statues of gods. One statue of Hermes even sparked a city-wide crisis after someone allegedly vandalized his phallus. The culprit was executed. The Greeks didn't just glorify the phallus, they worshipped it. At wine-soaked symposiums, men would drink from kylixes adorned with phallic images, so absurd you'd think they belonged in a satirical sketch show. One surviving vase shows a woman tilling a literal field of penises, as if harvesting lust from the soil. Others show men dancing with erections large enough to trip over. This wasn't just for laughs. The phallus was divine power, a symbol of fertility, masculinity, humor, and sacred absurdity. At religious festivals like the Dionysia, citizens paraded through the streets with giant wooden penises hoisted high, laughing, singing, shouting obscenities in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine and chaos. But under the humor, there was something deadly serious. In Greek society, to be virile was to be powerful. Masculinity wasn't just an identity, it was an obligation, a weapon. A man's ability to dominate sexually, politically, and culturally was often tied to his worth. Their graffiti may seem funny, but the obsession, that was war. 4. When gods had sex, mortals suffered. The Greek gods were not benevolent, they were not kind. They were carnal tyrants with thunderbolts and egos the size of Olympus. Their sexuality was wild, vengeful, and often horrifying. Take Aphrodite. Born from sea foam formed around Uranus's severed genitals. Her origin is violence, her power, seduction. She cheated on her husband Hephaestus with ours, She manipulated mortal men to kill for her. She caused wars, most famously the Trojan War, simply because a prince called her prettier than two other goddesses. Once, a mortal man named Glaucus insulted her, so Aphrodite fed his horses magic water. At the next chariot race, they went mad. They crushed him. Then they devoured him. This wasn't just mythology. Religion in ancient Greece bled into every aspect of life, especially sex. Temples of Aphrodite often doubled as centers of sacred prostitution, where women were offered to travelers in honor of the goddess. In Corinth, legend says 1,000 such women served in her name. Sex was not sin, it was devotion. To sleep with a stranger in the temple was to speak the language of the gods. But it wasn't always voluntary. Many women were sold into temple service under the veil of sanctity. Worship, in ancient Greece, was not love, it was surrender, and the gods were cruel lovers. 3. Adultery, the crime worse than rape. It seems impossible. In a culture that tolerated orgies, open homosexuality, and state brothels, adultery, and specifically adultery committed by a woman, was punished more severely than rape. Why? Because women were not individuals. They were property. To seduce a man's wife was to challenge his honor, his masculinity, his claim to power. It was theft not of love, but of ownership, according to Athenian law. A husband who caught his wife in bed with another man had the right to kill that man on the spot, no trial required. If he chose mercy, he might instead sodomize him with a radish in public or shave his genitals and parade him through the streets in women's clothing. The goal was humiliation, not justice, and rape. If the victim was unmarried, it was often seen as a lesser offense. After all, no man had yet claimed her. Assault did not challenge property, seduction did. Even the gods reflected this double standard. Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo, their myths are a gallery of forced encounters and deception. They changed form, tricked women, disguised themselves as swans, bulls, or even showers of gold to satisfy their desires, and still they were worshipped. The lesson for women in ancient Greece was chilling. You could be violated without consequence. But if you gave your heart to the wrong man, you were ruined. To the Symposium, where drunken genius and sex collided. Forget what you learned in philosophy class. The Greek Symposium was not some dry intellectual forum. It was a hedonistic, booze-fueled, sexually charged male sanctuary, a frat party with Socratic dialogue. Guests reclined on couches arranged in a circle. Slaves refilled wine endlessly. Games like kotabos were played, where men flicked wine dregs at targets, often while shouting the name of someone they desired. The floor was sticky, the air thick with perfume and sweat. There were performers, dancers, flute girls, comedians. Sometimes they entertained, sometimes they serviced. Prostitutes, especially the elite heterae, mingled among the guests, seducing not only with beauty, but with intellect. A hetera could debate Plato one moment and lie with a general the next. Women, unless hired, were forbidden. Respectable wives stayed home, raising children in silence. The Symposium was a temple of male indulgence, where rules dissolved with each cup of wine. That some symposia ended in philosophical brilliance, others ended in orgiastic chaos. More often, they did both. And what did this say of Greek values? That intellect and lust were not enemies, that sexual release could coexist with artistic inspiration, that men could own both mind and body, while women owned neither. 1. Masculinizing your wife for the wedding night. And now, we arrive at the strangest ritual of all. A custom so bizarre, so psychologically revealing, it almost sounds like parody. In Sparta, a man's wedding night didn't begin with candles or flowers. It began with a transformation, one that turned his bride into a boy. Yes, Spartan grooms were often first lovers with their male comrades in the agage. To transition into heterosexual marriage, they required their brides to appear masculine. Servants would shave the bride's head, dress her in a man's cloak and sandals, and lay her in the dark. Then the groom would sneak into the room, seize her like an ambush, and consummate the union as if conquering an enemy. The idea was that over time, he would get used to her. This wasn't fringe. This was normal. Why? Because love between men was valorized. It was strong, noble, built on shared war and suffering. Women were not seen as equals, but as breeding vessels. The emotional connection, the soul bond, belonged to men. And thus, to desire a woman, the Spartan man first had to erase her. This custom may have faded, but its echoes remain. In every culture that demands women reshape themselves to suit male desire, in every relationship where power replaces love, Sparta may be gone, but the shadow of that wedding night still lingers. The ancient Greeks gave us democracy, mathematics, epic poetry, but they also gave us satire, excess, and the perverse corners of civilization we like to pretend never existed. They were brilliant, they were brutal, and they were deeply, disturbingly human. In their sexuality, we see reflections of our own world, our hypocrisies, our taboos, our warped obsession with dominance, beauty, and control. Their weirdness is not just history, it's a mirror, cracked, obscene, but honest. Let the statues crumble, let the myths be rewritten. The truth, in all its naked madness, is far more interesting.